Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here again today. Firstly, Minister and Chair, I'd just like to acknowledge the government's announced review of coal LSL yesterday, and for our appreciation, we express our appreciation for being able to work with you on developing the terms of reference. We also thank miners in the Hunter Valley who've been working with us for 2 years to get this done, and I understand that coal LSL had never been called before I called them 5 Senate estimates ago, and we've now seen 5 times where embarrassing deficiencies have been revealed. So we'd also make note that I'll be requesting the reviewer, once he or she is announced, to contact miners specifically in the Hunter Valley and companies specifically in Hunter Valley as witnesses. So there are a lot of technical matters in what I want to go through and a lot of complications, and most of my questions, Ms Perks, will be directed to you. On the 24th of March, in response to my questions, the Coal Long Service Leave Corporation revealed that casual employees and permanent coal employees accrue long service leave entitlements at different rates, even when they work exactly the same rosters. Permanent employees always accrue their entitlement for 35 hours each week, regardless of the hours worked each week in the roster, which is variable per week. Casuals, though, in comparison, accrue their entitlement for the lesser of 35 hours each week or the hours worked each week. So if they work less than this amount, 35 hours in a week, because of their roster pattern, they get less entitlement accrued. This was previously confirmed as correct by you, Ms Perks. I assume this remains correct?
That is correct, Senator. The accrual that's defined in the Act states that the casual employee will accrue the same as the full-time employee if they work the 35-hour week or more. If they work less than a 35-hour week in that working week, then the accrual would be adjusted based on their working hours.
So that's despite the award, the Black Coal Mining Industry Award, not having any provision for casuals, so on production. But nonetheless, that's the way it's working now.
The accrual that's defined in the Act doesn't take the accrual from, or the definition from, the Black Coal Mining Industry Award. No, I understand that.
In effect, because employers contribute on an hourly basis for casuals, more levy is contributed into the scheme for casuals by the employers, as it is based on all hours worked rather than 35 hours for permanents. However, if hours are correctly recorded each week, according to Section 39AA of the Administration Act, casuals get less entitlement than permanents working exactly the same rosters. Is that correct?
Depending on the hours worked.
On the same roster. That's what's happening in the Hunter Valley at many mines right now. So employers must put more in for casuals, yet casuals get less out than permanents. So in relation to the calculation of accruals, Long Service Leave previously stated, Coal LSL previously stated that they were, quote, relying on the hours reported for the employee's working week to inform the accrual calculation for the casual employee, end of quote. These reports are provided monthly on a levy advice form along with the contribution of the monthly levy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Among other information, the levy advice form only asks for the total hours worked for the entire month by casual employees rather than their hours week by week. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So this number is reported as a single number each month, correct?
Correct.
Given this is the only way in which Coal LSL calculates accrual of long service leave entitlement, how is it then possible for Coal LSL to comply with the accrual requirements of Section 39AA, which require calculations to be performed for accruals each week, when Coal LSL only asks for information for the total hours per month?
The system will average the hours over the month, Senator. So if an employer reports 150 hours for that employee for the month, our system will apply the accrual in line with those hours worked. And this is an example of where the review may look to simplify the complexity of how the legislation has been written 10 years ago. So what we're seeing and what we understand as being a fundamental part of the review is to enhance the scheme, evolve it to align with how employment practices are being performed in the 21st century. So, that's a good example of where the review may recommend changes
the law state
to...
you'll calculate it weekly. So I know the system does it monthly, but the law says you'll calculate it weekly.
The system does it weekly, it applies an average, because employers do not pay their employees on a weekly basis. Our employers record the hours monthly or on their payroll systems.
That's a contradiction with the Act.
The system is applying the accrual on a weekly basis, which is in line with the Act. The hours are reported on a monthly levy return, which has been in place for over 10 years.
And I don't care how long it's been in place, the hours per week are variable on these rosters.
And in that case, with the reporting of the monthly hours, the casuals hours are, consolidated on that monthly total. So you would assume with that scenario that's happening that the casual isn't disadvantaged by the weekly roster variation, because the employer will be reporting the total hours that the casuals worked on that monthly basis. So if they've worked 70 hours in week 1 and 30 hours in week 2, the employer is going to aggregate those hours and report on a monthly basis the total hours that the casuals worked.
Casuals, though, are paid up to a maximum of 35 hours a week, even if they work more. Accrue Coal LSL, and they accrue it at the lower rate if they don't work 35 hours in a week.
The system will, the employer reports 150 hours, the system will apply an average of those hours over the weekly accrual.
Okay, let's continue. So the statement previously made that you are relying on the hours is only as good as the information you are asking for from employers, correct?
That's correct.
If insufficient information is being asked for to allow Coal LSL to calculate the correct accruals each week for casuals, as required by Section 39AA, how can Coal LSL have any confidence that their accruals for casual employees are correct?
Similar to responses in previous estimates, Senator, we rely on the audit reports, the annual audit reports that are submitted. It is part of the Payroll Levy Collection Act, part of our legislative framework, that employers must have their levy returns audited and their reimbursement claims audited. The auditor will submit that return to us, and if there's any variations that have been identified, the employer must rectify that, and we will ensure that it is rectified and employee records are updated.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Is the recording of accruals for coal employees currently up to date? If not, how long does it take from the provision of levy advice forms to recording hours in an employee's record?
No, we do have a backlog. We've had a backlog for the last 12 months resulting from a large number of employers that we've onboarded. Our employer numbers into the scheme have grown from 500 to 1,080 in a very short window of time. Our headcount has increased from 60 to now 160 to address that volume of transactions that need to be processed, but there is still a backlog, and it ranges from some employers are current and up to date, and I understand that it's more than 50% of our employers' records are up to date. Stats I received as late as yesterday tells me that it's getting closer to 70%. Okay. But the timeline that we have to rectify that backlog is December this year, and our resources are in place to ensure that that is met.
Okay, so that's a pretty big backlog.
Can I just clarify one thing? When you said 60 to 160, is that your increase in your staff?
Over a 4-year period to build the functions to be able to meet the increase in demands and onboard hundreds of employers with back levies going back to 2010. So we've had a compliance program in place since 2017 to address the compliance issues in the industry, and that has resulted in the industry employers coming into the scheme fold of over 500, and that's seen employees in the scheme grow from 44,000 to 53,000 current employees in the scheme. That number still should be higher. We know that. We know that there are employers still out there that should be paying, and we're addressing that through regulatory actions, and we do hope the review will also create some opportunities to help us provide a more efficient and effective regulatory process to address the compliance issues that we're aware of. But that growth has resulted in the growth in numbers coming into the scheme Our funds under management growing from $1.3 billion to over $2 billion in funds under management, and a large number of employees coming into the scheme that didn't have that benefit 4 years ago. So that's a great result. There's more work to do. We haven't hidden away from that, and the programs are in place to help us move to that position.
Ms Perks, you stated on the 24th of March that casuals, quote, accrue the same entitlement as the full-time equivalent. You also stated that quote, the intent of the scheme is structured correctly and all workers should be able to access an equivalent entitlement when they meet the 8 years qualifying service, end of quote. That's incorrect, isn't it? Because casuals actually accrue it slower, so that they'll take more than 8 years, whereas a permanent will take 8 years.
If the casual works 35 hours a week, which is the statement I've made, every Senate estimates...
But they're not accruing at that.
They are. If they work the 35 hours a week, they'll accrue the same accrual as the full-time worker. The legislation says that, and our administration...
The legislation says it, but...
And that's what we apply.
But the actual accrual is, if they work more than 35 hours in a week, they only accrue 35 hours. If they work less than 35 hours, they only accrue that lower amount. So they don't get 35 hours every week. So they must be longer.
My statement is, is consistent. If they work the 35 hours a week in line with the full-timer, they'll accrue the same accrual. If there's variations of that, the accrual will vary. My statement was correct.
But a permanent gets 35 hours a week regardless, because they're on a roster that has more than 35 hours and less than 35. A casual only gets lopped off at 35 and has less than 35. He or she can never get the same accrual.
And that might be an outcome of the review, Senator, that they see that there's a better way to...
That's the correct statement that I just made, though.
That is correct.
And
Thank you. My statement's also correct, where if they work the 35-hour a week, every week, they'll accrue the same as the full-time.
That is not sound statement, because you're omitting facts from that, and that is they're not given accrual for the more than 35 hours a week they work on the longer hours and longer weeks.
And a full-timer doesn't either. So the full-timer will accrue the accrual based on the full-timer.
But a full-timer gets 35 hours for lower than 35 hours. That's the point. That's an inherent flaw in the way you're operating the system. Casual working the same shift as a permanent will have 1 week where they work more than 35 hours and will get a full accrual. But we'll work 1 week where they get less than 35 hours and get only a partial accrual, whereas a permanent will get a full accrual. That's the difference. So the full-time worker gets a full entitlement for both weeks, and a casual gets a full entitlement for only 1 week and less than the full entitlement the following week, where their hours are less than for 35 hours that week. You've already agreed with that. And there is a differential calculation on the levies too, isn't there? The levy is on all hours per week for casuals, but capped at 35 hours for full-timers, correct?
It's on all hours for the casual, that is right. That is the definition under the Collection Act. The formula for a full-timer is different. It's based on whether they're on an annualised salary or if they're paid on a base rate plus. So it is a different formula.
So a full-timer is paid, the employer pays in for the 35 hours per week for permanents and pays in for the actual hours of the casual.
The full-timer, they're paid on ordinary hours, so that'll depend on their employment agreement.
Right.
So that's information.
So there's a differential calculation on the accrual, on the levies, and there's a differential calculation on the entitlement. So do you still believe then that the scheme provides, quote, an equivalent entitlement? Do you still believe that it is, quote, structured correctly? Or are there potential deficiencies in how the scheme is structured and managed that should be reviewed?
I see the review as an opportunity to look at enhancements to the scheme to get some complexities out of...
Thank you. Your response to a question on notice from the last round of estimates, and I'll give you the number of the question, EEC-AE21-85, states that you have engaged PricewaterhouseCoopers to conduct an employer audit program, including ascertaining if there is systemic or widespread under-reporting of casual hours, and you note that pursuant to Section 52A of your Act, that 12 registered employers have been issued with notices. Please advise the status of this review and if any employers will be breached and or fined.
So yes, that is correct. PwC have been engaged and the audit program is still in train. We're expecting the report from the audit mid-2021, so we don't have visibility of the audit findings as yet. 52A notices were issued to the employers in order for us to extract the payroll information to be used for the purpose of the audit. To this stage, as I said, we don't have any indication from the audit program on the issues, so I can't make any comment on whether there is any findings in regards to systemic or widespread issues.
So you can't state at the moment whether they will be breached or fined because you don't know the severity of what they've done?
That's correct. There's actions for us which colleague Mr Kembry can talk to that are available to us should there be any findings in the audit report. But at this stage, we certainly aren't aware of what action will be taken.
As it's been...
Can I just clarify what is 52A, please?
Senator Peter Kembry, General Manager, Legal Coal LSL. Section 52A just refers to the section in the Administration Act that allows the corporation to issue a notice on an employer or any other person that they think has relevant documents for us to assess whether they employ eligible employees, or whether, in this case, it's about whether we're extracting their payroll data so we can actually have an independent audit done to see whether they're paying the levy correct and also reporting the correct amount of hours that employees work.
Thank you.
So,
and you said mid-year to Senator Roberts. It's mid-year now.
Yeah.
When?
We're expecting June, July.
Thanks.
As it's been explained to me, we'll move on to a slightly different topic within the general area. As it's been explained to me, the Coal LSL scheme provides the ability for employees to request to be paid extra amounts directly into their wages instead of contributions into the scheme. If they do this, it immediately becomes their money rather than going into the pooled fund of the Coal LSL. Is that correct? And what have you done since to inform relevant employees of this opportunity to put more money in their pay packet?
Senator, I think you're referring to the waiver agreement provisions in the Administration Act. So that's only available to a small cohort of employees. It's really aimed at people either on high incomes or people coming to the back end of their career, like from that 55 to 60, who won't accrue a benefit because they haven't been in the industry long enough. And what they can do is nominate for their the long service leave contribution to be paid to them in a different way. A lot of the ones that I've seen.
So my question is, what have you done to inform those people?
Well, inform the employers of that. There's information on our websites about that. We have those discussions.
What have you done to draw it to the miners' attention that they can do that?
To the miners' attention? Yes. There's information in regard to that in the information.
What have you
provide.
done to draw that to their attention?
Personally,
we raised it with you, what has Coal LSL done?
Well,
because we raised it with you before.
Well, Senator, we don't often have the information at our disposal to tell us who could qualify for that.
Could you tell an employer?
Yes.
Have you told the employers?
Have that information or can access that information.
Senator Roberts, I was wondering how long you've got left.
Probably another 5 minutes.
Another 5 minutes, and then Senator O'Neill has a couple of questions, and Senator Canavan. Just so people are aware, we were due to break at 11:15. We will break after we've concluded with the current witnesses, so hopefully 11:05 if it all goes to plan, maybe 10 past.
It seems that the current systems that you administer are unnecessarily complex and confusing for both employer and employee alike. Coal LSL has a guidance note explaining how it calculates the levies on the eligible wages for coal employees. It provides two formulas, one for casual employees and one for permanent employees. Employers of casual employees are required to pay the levy on all hours worked, whereas employers of permanent employees contribute based on a maximum of 35 hours per week. Now, you've acknowledged that's correct. Your response from last estimates to the question on notice EEC-AE21-87 does not hit the mark for me on all coal employers and workers. This is all based on a Coal LSL guidance note that interprets the Act. Given the potential for such an inequitable outcome, is it still possible that your interpretation is wrong? Is the system comprising 3 acts, incorrect guidance notes, casuals treated differently from permanents, monthly instead of weekly reporting, just too complex and needs reviewing?
Firstly, Senator, I'll just clarify, I didn't agree on the way you described the calculation of the full-timer. It's not on the 35 hours. The levy formula is based on the ordinary hours. So I just want to make sure that that is reflected because it's not on 35 hours a week.
As I understand it, the coal award is 35 hours standard hours per week.
Eligible employees of the scheme are not required to be employed under the award. The eligibility criteria is based on the duties of the employee, and if the duties are associated with the day-to-day operations of a coal mine, they are covered by the scheme. It's irrespective of the employment agreement or the award that they may be employed under. So in that regard, we don't have visibility of the employment agreement. So the Act, as it's been written back in 2010, states the calculation for a full-timer is to be based on the ordinary hours worked, and it's linked to the Fair Work Act provisions as well.
Okay.
And apologies, now I can't recall the rest of the question.
Is it too complex and needs reviewing, the whole system?
It is complex. What we find with the inconsistencies in our dealings with the employers is the payroll officers, they find the calculation confusing. So if there's an opportunity to simplify it with the review that's been announced as of yesterday, then we'd welcome that. Most employers are used to calculating a levy in regards to superannuation. So if it can be simplified, because there are 3 formulas and it does make it more complex, and it is an administrative burden on employers in the industry to conduct that formula every month.
Okay. This disadvantage seems to me and to many casual coal miners to be wage theft. What are you doing to ensure you're not perpetuating wage theft?
The levy is a tax that's paid, Senator. It's not a wage payment. It's not superannuation. We have nothing to do with the superannuation scheme. It is a levy that's paid. It's a tax that's collected and then appropriated through consolidated revenue of the Australian government back to the fund. I don't associate that with wage theft. It's completely different.
Different entitlements and accruals for different employees doing the same job side by side. One because he or she is a casual and the other because he or she is a permanent.
Senator, if I might, certainly while I understand the concern issues raised, and there was a similar issue raised yesterday, the Coal Long Service Leave Board is responsible for administering the legislation and they're required to follow the legislation. The review is an opportunity to have a look at that legislation and to see what's appropriate and whether there can be improvements made to it. But I certainly wouldn't characterise as a body undertaking its legal responsibilities as engaging in wage theft.
Perhaps, Mr. Hare, would you see that the Coal LSL has a responsibility to not only comply with the Act, but to draw to its department, its overseers, that there are significant changes needed and a review needed?
Senator, the government, as you're aware, has announced the review of the Coal Long Service Leave
No, my question is, we know that the review has been announced, Mr. Hare, but surely it's up to Coal LSL to have drawn these items to the attention of whoever oversees them and to fix them, because we've got casuals and permanents being paid different amounts.
So, Senator, the policy responsibility sits within the department. I'm aware that there's been engagement between the department and the Coal Long Service Leave Board looking at a range of issues over a period of time, including whether there could be amendments to legislation. In the end, a decision's been taken by the government that the best way of progressing that is to review the operation of the Act and the Coal Long Service Leave Board. So that's there. I don't have the detail of the discussions, but I am certainly aware that the officers here have raised issues around the legislation with my team, and in the end, a decision has been made to undertake a formal review.
Last question, Chair, just a quick one. Can you remember in the very first Senate estimate session that Coal LSL attended, when you said there'd be no need for any of this, and we've had employees coming to you and not having their concerns addressed? You said there'd be no need for any of this. What do you say now?
Sorry, I missed that question, Senator.
Can you remember in the first Senate estimates session you attended when you said there will be no need for any of this? And now, what do you have to say?
What do you mean by any of this, Senator?
Any of the review, any of the unfair application of the award of the Act to the casuals compared with the permanents?
I don't recall making that statement, Senator, but I know that Coal
Well, I
LSL has
recall
been
you
in
saying nothing
discussions
to
with
see here.
industry working parties since 2018 on opportunities to address the inconsistencies in the scheme. So I'm very confident that the people in the organisation have had front of mind how to help employers and employees understand and apply a consistent application of the frameworks that we are here to administer. So
That sounds good, but it's inconsistent with what I remember. And I remember raising issues for employees. No, there's no issues for employees. Then you admitted there were. Then there are other issues we're now discussing. So anyway, we'll look for the review. Thank you, Chair.
Roberts, before I wrap it up, I suppose, I'd just like to add, if it's okay, that the government's very clear that it is utterly unacceptable for there to be an underpayment of wages or entitlements, and it is absolutely the case that all employers, particularly large employers, must be focused on ensuring they've got the systems in place that are necessary to make sure that that does not occur. As a government, we acknowledge that there are some inconsistencies and complexities in this area that need to be resolved, and you've worked very constructively with the government to make sure they're on the agenda, and I know that my Queensland colleagues and I have observed that too when we've been on the road, that there are matters here that need to be addressed. It's really important, as you've observed, that there be clear and simple processes for employers, particularly small businesses, to make sure they're complying with their obligations, so that working people don't get shortchanged. I'm very optimistic that this review will lead to the kind of clarifications and simplifications that are necessary to make sure that consistency happens. And I want to encourage you, as I know many others will want to engage with the review to make sure that the matters that you've been raising through estimates are completely flushed out and addressed, so that we can move to a point where we can look back on this as a productive moment in the history of the Coal LSL Corporation.
Thank you, Minister. We'll be doing our bit.
Thank you.
Senator O'Neill.
Bringing some wage theft legislation any day now to back up what Senator Stoker's just said. I think there was one question from Senator Sheldon, if that's all right,
That's
Chair.
okay, Senator Sheldon.
Good, thanks very much. I just wanted to ask and acknowledge Senator Roberts' work in this area and the Miners' Union. Just to you, Senator Stoker, Ms Parkes said that wage calculations may need to be simplified for convenience or simplicity's sake, for, I'm using my language now, red tape for employers, to decrease the compliance complexity, as you described it. It just raises, when everyone says simplification to me, I immediately go, well, regards people's wages and calculations, I'm just going to, is the government able to give an undertaking that no coal miner will be worse off as a result of this inquiry?
Sorry, Senator, it wasn't, I don't think Ms Perks said the wages need to be, the calculation of the wages.
Calculations.
It's about the levy.
Calculations.
Yeah, about the levy calculations.
Yeah, the levy calculation. I'm sorry, I am referring to the levy calculations. Yes. So can the government give an undertaking that that no worker will be worse off due to this review?
I think that's the obvious consequence of what the Deputy Secretary said, in the sense that the review goes to the calculation of levies, not the calculation of entitlements. I've understood that correctly, haven't I?
Look, certainly, Senator, the review will provide advice on where the issues are and potential solutions for them. There's certainly nothing that in our advice or the Minister's decision around the review that would look at workers being worse off. It certainly is trying to make sure that people receive the entitlements they can get to, that they're entitled to. If there's issues within the legislation about it potentially being unfair in terms of the way the legislation is currently crafted, we'll certainly have a look at that and try and make sure that it's as fair as possible across the board.
Thank you, Mr. Heer.
I should add,
Senator Sheldon, that it's clear on the terms of reference that there is no intention to reduce the LSL entitlement of eligible employees as a part of this. So I think you can have confidence from the terms of reference that that's so.
Senator O'Neill.